This is the BYD Seal. Is this the Chinese electric car to beat the Tesla Model 3?
It has a massive range.
And a swivelly infotainment system. And in this review, we're telling you what it's like. But first, this video is supported by PodPoint, winner of our Best Home EV Charger Test 2023. Look in our description below to find out more. So BYD, or Build Your Dreams, is a massive company from China which arrived in Europe with the BYD Atto 3, and it quickly followed that up with the BYD Dolphin, and now we have the BYD Seal, which in BYD's own words is a true masterpiece of ocean-inspired design. It's a pretty direct rival to the Tesla Model 3, and it's also going to be up against other electric cars like the BMW i4, the Hyundai Ioniq 6 and the Polestar 2. But this stands out. We'll go into that later on, but first let's look at this interior in the Seal. And the driving position you have is very typical of a saloon. You're fairly low down, feels kind of sporty, but it's not perfect. So you have a 15.6-inch touchscreen infotainment system as standard, and it is massive, but it's so big that actually your view of it is partially blocked by the steering wheel here. You can, though, whack it into portrait mode, and there are no problems with the visibility of the screen. However, if you want to use Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, then it will force the screen back into landscape mode because you can't run it in portrait. So for someone like me who uses Apple CarPlay every minute of every car journey, I'd never be able to use the portrait layout. But the screen itself is reasonably good. It's bright, it looks quite nice. It's not the quickest in its response time, but it's still fairly good by infotainment system standards. And yes, it is a shame that the climate controls are on the touchscreen. There are no separate physical controls for them, but at least this screen is massive and all these icons are reasonably easy to hit while you're driving. Now, the driver display. It is quite busy, and a lot of the screen is dedicated to this kilowatt figure, which basically tells you how much power you're using at any given moment. It is an absolutely useless number that you do not need to know, and it is constantly jumping around while you're driving. So it's really frustrating when you're just on the motorway going at a steady 70 and it is still jumping around all over the place. So that is a very annoying and distracting thing which you can't change, unfortunately. But it definitely isn't all bad in the interior of this Seal, because there are lots of things which are good, like the standard list of equipment that you get. You get this huge touchscreen as standard, you get heated and ventilated seats as standard, you get wireless phone charging pads for 2 smartphones, which is very impressive. And also the materials in here are pretty good. It's a fairly eclectic mix, so you've got some really nice stuff up on the dashboard here, and this feels reasonably good around the center console, but there are also some cheaper feeling plastics dotted around the interior as well. So it's not perfect throughout, but the build quality is good. It must be said though that all the versions of the Seal that we've driven so far have had quite a strong smell of plastic inside. Practicality does impress though. So you've got this big, nicely padded armrest here, same on the door, and under this you've got a big storage compartment, and there's 2 cup holders, you've got this wireless phone charging tray, and under this center console bit here, you've got another big storage compartment. So, not perfect, but there is a lot to like still in the Seal. All Seals get a sunroof as standard, but this isn't a scenario where you're given a sunroof and the available rear headroom is really restricted as a result, because in the Seal, that isn't the case. You still have the benefit of having this open, airy sunroof, and headroom is still good if you're an adult sat in the back. If you're 6 foot or over, you might just begin to feel a little cramped in that respect, but legroom is very good in this car. It's also great, there's a flat floor back here as well, so if you're sitting 3 adults side by side, that's a real benefit. But the problem with these rear seats is more the actual sitting position, because as you can see, there isn't much in the way of under-thigh support. So it would be nicer if these seat bases were perhaps angled up more or slightly longer than they are, and the seat backs are quite an odd shape as well. So it does mean from a practicality perspective there isn't necessarily anything very wrong with the Seal, just the sitting position means that you'll be more comfortable in this car's rivals. Now you can open the boot of the Seal with the key, but if you're back here and you don't want to do that, then you have to press this button down here, which is perfectly placed on a wet and miserable day like this to pick up on all the wet and muck and grime from the road, so that isn't particularly great. And it's the same for the door handles actually. But the boot itself is fairly decent in the Seal. Overall, you have 400 litres of storage, which just about matches the Ioniq 6, but it is smaller than an i4 and quite a lot smaller than a Model 3. You can see you have some underfloor storage at the front here, which is handy, but it doesn't go all the way under the whole of the boot floor. The aperture is fairly small, but in total, we managed to get 8 carry-on size suitcases into the Seal. But that includes one up front in this handy 55 litre storage compartment. A BMW i4 can fit 7 suitcases in total, and that's only in its boot because it doesn't have any front storage like this. In the BYD Seal, as with every other electric car that has a front boot, this is very handy, especially for the charging cables. Anyway, what makes the Seal stand out from its rivals? Well, it's the name really, isn't it? Seal doesn't really blend in among BMW i4, Polestar 2, Tesla Model 3, and we've seen other wacky names from Chinese electric car companies as well. Things didn't go brilliantly for the Aura Funky Cat, which has recently rebranded to become the much more boring GWM Aura 03, but there isn't any suggestion that the Seal name is going to change in the future. And to be honest, it is more subtle than Funky Cat. BYD has said, though, that you will no longer find "Build Your Dreams" written out on the back of its cars in Europe. The first Atto 3s to come to the UK did have it, but the Seal won't. The exception to that is the Dolphin, because "Build Your Dreams" is actually in the light cluster, so it's a lot harder to remove. But BYD shouldn't be laughed at, because this is a very serious EV brand which outsold Tesla in the last 3 months of 2023, largely thanks to its incredible sales in China. So we might not be so familiar with BYD in Europe, but this is a massive company, which started out life making batteries, but is now a fully fledged electric car brand looking to make a big impact in Europe.
And its beginnings as a battery making company has helped it transition into the electric car market. For a start, being able to produce its own batteries for its cars saves BYD a lot of money, because batteries are among the most expensive parts of an EV. Like the Atto 3 and BYD's other electric cars, the Seal gets what's called a blade battery, which is a lithium iron phosphate unit, LFP, which unlike most other electric car batteries, doesn't need cobalt. So for a start, that's a plus, because the mining of cobalt is quite a contentious issue. This battery is also said not to degrade as quickly as others, partly because it doesn't have such a negative impact if you charge the battery up to full regularly. There are some downsides to LFP units though. They're less energy dense than alternatives, meaning they're heavier than a rival battery with the same capacity.
Now, there are 2 different versions of the Seal you can buy. There is this entry-level design Seal, which is rear-wheel drive, but there's also a range-topping excellence Seal, which is 4-wheel drive. Whichever one you go for, you get the same battery, and it has a usable capacity of 82.5 kilowatt hours. And in this entry-level model, the official range is a very impressive 354 miles. If you go for the range-topping excellence Seal, then it's more powerful, it's 4-wheel drive, but it can't travel quite as far on a full charge. So the official range is listed at 323 miles. When it comes to charging up, the Seal can accept a maximum charging rate of 150 kilowatts. That means if you find a charger fast enough, you can get a 10 to 80% top up in 38 minutes. Most other rivals can charge faster. And here's something annoying. While the Seal is charging, the driver display only shows you how much battery percentage you have. It doesn't show you anywhere how many miles you're able to cover, which is really the only thing you need to know. If you want to find that out, you have to download an app and look at it on there. And to be fair, if you own the Seal, you probably would download the app and be used to doing that. But it does seem a shame and slightly annoying that you can't just pop your head in while the car's charging to check how many miles you're able to cover. Anyway, we've seen that the interior of the Seal stacks up fairly well compared to its European rivals, but how does it compare on the road? Well, as we said, there are 2 different versions of this car. We'll start with the range-topping 4-wheel drive excellence Seal, because it is truly rapid. It will do 0 to 62 miles an hour in just 3.8 seconds. And as with all very quick electric cars, the way that it delivers its pace off the line is truly rapid and brutal, and it is funny. But do you really need to go that quickly? Because we're in the entry-level design model, which has 1 electric motor driving the rear wheels, and this is still very quick. It will still do 0 to 62 miles an hour in 5.9 seconds, which isn't as quick as a Model 3 Performance or as the range-topping version of this car, but it still has plenty of pace for most needs. The two different versions of the Seal also have two slightly different suspension setups as well, but really on the road, you'd be hard pushed to notice a big difference between the two. So they both ride in pretty much the same manner. That is to say, they aren't quite as sophisticated as a Model 3. They're relatively well suited to our battered British roads, soaking up imperfections pretty impressively, but there is a kind of bobbing sensation up and down that you get in this car, which you don't have in a Model 3 or in an i4. So those two cars ultimately ride better than this. When you're on a particularly coarse surface in the Seal, you can also notice some vibrations coming up through the steering column. Now you don't have that in many other electric rivals to this car, and it does become a little bit annoying and noticeable. And another annoying thing about the Seal is that the test cars we've driven so far have the indicators and the wipers the other way round to what you'd expect in the UK. So it means if you're trying to turn left, you're accidentally turning the windscreen wipers on. Or if you're going right, then again, you're changing the windscreen wipers. Or if it's raining, you're just deciding to indicate. So that is quite annoying and takes quite a while to try and rewire your brain to understand which way round they are. And we haven't actually had it confirmed by BYD that UK customer cars will definitely have them the way round that you'd expect. So we'll have to see what they're like when those first customer cars arrive in the UK. But anyway, a strength of the Seal on the road is actually the steering itself, because it's more feelsome and more communicative than what you have in an i4 and in a Model 3. It's not like some of the best fuel-powered saloon cars, but it is still precise, nicely weighted and impressive. And the handling generally in the Seal is pretty good. It is a big, heavy electric car, but it does well to hide its weight through corners. Body lean is kept well in check. So, with its good steering, decent ride, fairly impressive handling, this is a nice electric car to do some miles in, if not quite as good as its best rivals.
And if you want to buy a BYD Seal, which version should you go for and how should you spec it?
Of the two versions available, it's an extra £3,000 to jump up from the entry-level Seal to the range-topping version. If you really want that extra pace or you're desperate for four-wheel drive, then fair enough. But the entry-level design model, with its longer range and cheaper price, seems the sensible choice. And for the record, this isn't a particularly cheap electric car. There does seem to be a perception that every electric car from China is incredibly cheap and perhaps unfairly so, but that isn't the case for BYD. It's not that it's expensive, but it's priced in line with its rivals, and a Model 3 is still cheaper than this. Plus, because this is expected to suffer from pretty heavy depreciation, it means that monthly PCP finance deals aren't particularly enticing compared to its rivals. Speccing up a Seal is a pretty simple process because there isn't much to choose from. You get 4 colours which you can have as standard without paying any extra, or if you do want to spend a little bit more, then that gives you a choice of an extra 2. Inside, there are 2 different colour schemes, neither of them cost any extra to have. There's no choice in the wheels and there are no other options to add, which is absolutely fine because you get loads of equipment as standard. So you get this infotainment system, you get heated and ventilated front seats, you get adaptive cruise control with lane keeping assistance, you get dual zone air conditioning, and you get a very high quality and snazzy parking camera. And if you're a bit wary of buying from a car brand that you've never heard of before, you can rest assured that the Seal has a maximum 5-star safety rating from experts Euro NCAP, and it comes with a very impressive 6-year or 96,000 mile warranty. So the BYD Seal might have a wacky name, but this is a pretty serious electric car. It's decent inside and on the road, and it comes with tons of equipment, but it has the same problem as lots of other electric cars. The Model 3 is better and cheaper. Thanks for watching this review. If you want to see another one, then click up there. And if you want a great deal on your next car, and if you want to read our written review of the Seal, go to whatcar.com by clicking there.